There is a particular kind of satisfaction that comes from making something small and precise out of paper. Not the satisfaction of finishing, though that is real, but the satisfaction of the process itself. The moment when a fold lands exactly where you intended it. The moment when a scored edge curves exactly as the template promised. The moment when two pieces join and the seam disappears, and what was flat becomes three-dimensional, and what was flat becomes a world. Papercraft is one of the oldest making traditions in human culture, and it produces, at its best, something that no digital model or printed plastic can replicate. An object that holds the evidence of the hands that made it, that carries in its surfaces the small imperfections and the specific decisions of a specific person on a specific afternoon. We are going to build a Fumikiri, a Japanese railroad level crossing in miniature, from paper. If you have never encountered the word Fumikiri before, it means the point where a road and a railway track meet at the same grade. No bridge, no tunnel, just the crossing of two paths at the surface. In Japan, Fumikiri crossings are everywhere. In cities, in rural towns, tucked between houses on narrow residential streets. They are so familiar to Japanese daily life that they appear constantly in anime and manga and film as a backdrop. The striped gate coming down, the bells ringing, the red lights flashing, the gate lifting, life resuming. The Fumikiri is not dramatic. It is ordinary. And in Japan, the ordinary is often the most carefully designed thing of all. Before we talk about how to build the Fumikiri, let us talk about why. Why make a miniature of something so specifically ordinary? A railroad crossing is not a cathedral, it is not a landmark. It is not even, in most cases, architecturally notable. It is functional infrastructure, a gate, a signal box, some lights, a stretch of track, a painted road surface. And yet, the Fumikiri in miniature, in paper, becomes something worth the hours it takes to build. Because miniaturization does something strange and wonderful to the ordinary. It makes you look at it. Really look. When you are building a paper model of a Fumikiri gate mechanism, you have to understand how the gate actually works, what connects to what moves and what stays still, where the counterweight sits, how the boom arm attaches to the pivot. You have to know the thing in order to make the thing, and knowing it changes your relationship to it permanently. Papercraft as a serious making tradition has several distinct lineages. There is origami, the Japanese art of folding without cutting, where the entire model emerges from a single uncut sheet through the precision of folds alone. There is kirigami, folding and cutting combined. There is papier-mâché, the building of three-dimensional forms over armatures using layers of wet paper and adhesive. And there is paper modeling, sometimes called card modeling or papercraft, which works more like architecture than like origami. In paper modeling, you work from a printed template of flat pieces, score and fold each piece precisely, and assemble the pieces into a three-dimensional structure using adhesive. The model is essentially a building, in miniature, constructed from flat sheets according to a plan. This is the tradition we are working in when we build a miniature Fumikiri. The first decision in any paper model project is scale. What scale will our Fumikiri be? In model railway terms, the most common scales are N scale, approximately 1 to 160, and HO scale, approximately 1 to 87. An N scale Fumikiri, if built at accurate proportions, would have a gate boom arm of roughly 8 centimeters. An HO scale model would have a boom arm of around 13 centimeters. The choice of scale affects everything. The thickness of paper that reads correctly at scale, the size of details that are worth including versus those that are too small to render in paper, the physical handling of the model during construction. For a first Fumikiri build, HO scale is more forgiving. The pieces are large enough to work with, small enough to remain clearly miniature, and the proportions feel right on a standard model railway layout. The materials for a paper Fumikiri model are modest, but specific. You will need cardstock, not ordinary printer paper, which is too thin and too flexible to hold the structure you're building, but cardstock in the range of 200 to 300 grams per square meter. You will need a craft knife with a fresh blade. A dull blade drags and tears rather than cutting cleanly. And clean cuts are the difference between a model that reads as precise and one that reads as approximate. You will need a metal ruler for straight cuts. You will need a cutting mat to protect your work surface. You will need a bone folder or a similar scoring tool for creating clean fold lines. You will need white glue or precision applicant PVA adhesive, not super glue which bonds too fast to allow adjustments, and not ordinary glue stick which lacks the strength for structural joints. And you will need patience, not as a metaphor, as a literal material requirement.
Let us build the base first. The base of the Fumikiri model is the road surface and the track crossing, the point where road meets rail in miniature. In a real Fumikiri, the road surface between and beside the rails is typically made of rubber panels that fit around the rail profile and allow vehicle tires to cross without catching on the rail. In paper, we represent this with a textured gray surface, scored with the lines that suggest panel joints, with two parallel strips of slightly raised dark card representing the rails. The rails in a paper Fumikiri are not functional. They do not carry rolling stock, but their profile must be correct. In HO scale, the rail height is approximately 1.5 millimeters. Achieving this from laminated strips of cardstock requires cutting 3 or 4 layers of thin card and laminating them together, then shaping the top with a sanding stick. It is small and exacting and entirely worth doing correctly. The signal box, the small structure that houses the crossing mechanism and the operator station, is the architectural heart of the Fumikiri model. In Japan, Fumikiri signal boxes come in several standard designs that have evolved over decades of standardization by different railway operators. The most common is a small rectangular structure, approximately the size of a garden shed, with a corrugated metal roof, a window facing the track, and a control panel visible through the glass. In paper, the signal box is built as a box, literally a box, with 4 walls, a floor, and a roof. But the details on the walls, the window frames, the door, the ventilation louvers, the safety signage, are what transform the box from a geometric exercise into something that reads as inhabited, as purposeful, as real at its scale. The weathering of the signal box, the slight discoloration at the roof edges, the fading of the painted surfaces, can be suggested with colored pencil applied lightly after construction. This is called dry weathering, and it is one of the most satisfying steps in any paper model build. The boom arm of the Fumikiri gate is the most kinetically satisfying element to build and the most structurally challenging. In a real Fumikiri, the boom arm is a striped pole, red and white bands, alternating that pivots on a mechanism at the signal box end and swings from horizontal to vertical when the gate opens. It is counterweighted so that it can be operated with minimal force. In a paper model, the boom arm is a laminated strip of red and white card, reinforced internally with a thin wire spine to prevent it from sagging under its own weight. The pivot mechanism, a short length of wire passed through a card housing, it will not operate exactly as the real mechanism operates, but it will hold whatever angle you choose, which means your model can be posed either open or closed, and the decision of which to choose is itself a small act of composition. The warning lights of the Fumikiri are a detail that separates a good paper model from a great one. In a real crossing, the red warning lights flash alternately, left, right, as the train approaches. In a static paper model, you cannot replicate the flashing, but you can replicate the form, the circular lamp housings, the protective hoods above them, the slightly convex lens surface that catches the light. These are made from tiny cylinders of rolled card, capped with a disc of red-tinted translucent paper if you have it, or red card if you do not. At HO scale, each lamp housing is approximately 4 millimeters in diameter. Cutting a clean circle of 4 millimeters from cardstock without it tearing or distorting is the kind of operation that requires a circle punch tool, or very steady hands and a very sharp blade, and either way requires you to be entirely present in what you are doing. There is no multitasking at 4 millimeters. The track that approaches and exits the Fumikiri crossing is the element that places the model in its context, that says this is not just a gate and a signal box, but a place where a railway exists in the world. Even in a diorama that represents only a small section of track, the sleepers, the cross ties that hold the rails at the correct gauge, must be individually represented. In paper, sleepers are cut from brown or gray card, slightly textured with a pencil or sanding stick to suggest weathered timber, and laid at the correct spacing for the scale. In HO scale, sleepers are spaced approximately 6 millimeters apart at the center. The track bed, the gravel ballast that holds the sleepers in place, can be represented with fine sand or model ballasts glued to the base, or in an all-paper build with a textured card surface printed or drawn to suggest the gravel texture. The ballast is the detail that most people skip and that most experienced model makers consider non-negotiable. There is a tradition in Japanese diorama making closely associated with the work of modelers who create miniature scenes rather than simply miniature objects, called the art of the moment. The idea is that a diorama should capture a specific instant, not a generic scene of a Fumikiri, but this Fumikiri at this moment with these specific conditions. Perhaps the gate is down and a single cyclist is waiting beside it, bag on the handlebars, looking at their phone. Perhaps it is raining, suggested by a coat of gloss varnish on horizontal surfaces and tiny droplet shapes on the signal box window. Perhaps it is winter, and there is snow on the roof of the signal box, white card dust, applied with a dry brush before the final gloss coat. The moment is what transforms a model from a technical exercise into a small piece of frozen narrative. And choosing the moment is where the maker's individual vision enters the work. The human figures that populate a Fumikiri diorama deserve a word of their own. In paper modeling, human figures can be built from paper. Tiny cones and cylinders and flat cutouts assembled into figures that read as people at model distance. Alternatively, commercially produced figures in the correct scale can be incorporated. Resin or metal figures from model railway suppliers painted to suggest the specifics of the moment you are creating. The Penjaga Palang Pensu, or in a Japanese context, the Fumikiri operator, is a figure worth including. His small form beside the signal box in his uniform is the detail that reminds the viewer that this crossing is not automated, that a human being is present here, that the gate comes down because someone decided to lower it. Even at 1.87 scale, the human figure is the most important element in the composition. Paper modeling has a relationship with time that is worth naming explicitly. It is slow. Not slow the way watching a download progress bar is slow. Slow in the way of growing something is slow, where the slowness is intrinsic to the process and cannot be hurried without destroying what you are trying to achieve. A paper Fumikiri model of reasonable complexity, signal box, gate mechanism, warning lights, track section with ballast, road surface, 1 or 2 figures, basic weathering will take somewhere between 8 and 20 hours to complete, depending on your experience and the precision you are aiming for. Those hours cannot be compressed. They must be spent, one fold at a time, one cut at a time, one small joint at a time. And this is not a problem. This is the point. The slowness is where the value is. There is something that happens to a person who spends 20 hours building something at 187 scale. Their relationship to the real-world thing they have been modeling changes. If you have spent 20 hours building a paper Fumikiri, studying photographs, understanding the mechanism, representing every detail you could achieve at that scale, and then you encounter a real Fumikiri, you see it differently. You see the gate mechanism and understand how it works. You see the signal box and notice the details you included in your model, and the ones you simplified or left out. You see the warning lights and remember the 4mm circles of red card. The model has given you a new kind of vision, the vision of someone who has paid close attention, who has committed the structure of a thing to the knowledge of their hands, as well as their eyes. This is what making gives you, not just the thing you made, a new way of seeing everything connected to it. The finished paper Fumikiri sits on your desk or your shelf or your model railway layout, and it is small and precise and unmistakably handmade. The seams, if you look closely, are visible. The fold lines are present. The human decisions, the angle of the boom arm, the moment of weathering you chose, the figure you placed and where you placed them are all visible too, because they are all yours. A paper model is not a reproduction, it is a record. It holds in its surfaces the evidence of the hours you spent with it, the care you gave it, the specific way your hands and your eye worked together on the afternoon you built it. And that record does not fade. 20 years from now, the paper Fumikiri on your shelf will still hold those hours. The train in your memory will still be passing through it. The gate will still be in whatever position you chose. And the moment you captured, the moment you made real at 1.87 scale from nothing but flat sheets of card and the hours you were willing to give will still be frozen there, small and precise and entirely yours. If you are someone who has always thought of paper as something disposable, something that carries information to be discarded once the information has been received, I want to suggest that you have been working with the wrong paper toward the wrong end with insufficient respect for the material. Paper is one of the most versatile making materials in human history. It can be strong or delicate, opaque or translucent, smooth or textured, flat or three-dimensional. It can carry color, hold a crease, support its own weight, and outlast its maker when treated with care. The paper Fumikiri on your shelf is not a toy and it is not a replica. It is a practice in paying attention. It is what you get when you decide to look at something ordinary long enough and careful enough to understand it. Subscribe if you find this kind of making worth your time, and tell me in the comments, what would you build in paper if you gave yourself 20 hours and permission to be completely absorbed?